Sup, yo? This is your boy, Fearless Eagle, right? On Fearless Eagle ZA. And yeah, today I'm basically gonna be looking at a story that I ran across by the story of Jonathan James. And yeah, I was intrigued by this, so I'm gonna be basically reacting to what happened. And this is gonna be my first time actually watching the video and going through the video with you. So we're gonna be looking at the story of Jonathan James and what went down within his life, concerning him hacking NASA, yo. The boy hacked NASA. That's how gangster he was. So yeah, we're gonna be looking at that and yeah, see what went down. Yeah, let us get into this. Let's get into this.
An interest, an addiction, an obsession with the computer and the internet is nowadays quite prevalent. However, about half a century ago, computers were still a luxury, and individuals with technical about computers were few and far between. It was in 1971 when the microcomputer revolution was sparked by the commercial release of the Intel 4004 microprocessor, which made computers easier and cheaper to manufacture, thereby increasing its affordability. And in about a decade or so, in the early 1980s, around 8% of households were reported to have a computer in their personal possession.
Yeah.
When you consider the fact that in 2016, 89% of households were reported to own at least one computer of some sort, 8% may seem small. However, it was still a considerable amount at the time. It was also in the 1980s when the story of Jonathan James begins. He was the first minor to be sentenced to a juvenile detention center for cybercrime in the United States. This is the story of how a young boy's obsession with
Whoa, whoa, wait. The boy got sent to juvenile prison. Why? No, man. So if I have a passion for computers and learning, and I'm thinking I should help Google improve their security, I'm gonna get sent to prison. Uh, I don't agree with what happened here, but
the computer eventually tore his life apart. The tragic life of the late young Jonathan James. It was the year 1982 when Robert James and his wife Joan Jurista settled into Miami-Dade County, Florida. About a year later, on December 12th of 1983, Joanne gave birth to their first child, Jonathan Joseph James, and together they settled into a small ranch-style home where the village of Pinecrest is located today. His father, who was now a computer programmer at Miami-Dade County, had a small work machine set up at home, which at the very young age of 6, Jonathan would take a consuming interest in, playing games for hours and hours on end all through the night, which is nothing strange or new, especially in this day and age, but back then it wasn't something that was common. In fact, this was at a time before studies into computer and internet addiction had even begun. His parents, growing increasingly worried about his health and education, watching their son's addiction interfering with his daily life, tried to impose parental controls. But this would only serve as a challenge to Jonathan, something he needed to bypass.
why
And so he
do
did, repeatedly finding ways around these restrictions that his parents would place on the computer. His interests only grew after this, as he progressed from being interested in just games to learning the ins and outs of how the computer worked. Eventually, he'd even become well versed with the C programming language. In an interview, Robert James would recollect that he had once come home to find that his son had completely stripped the Windows operating system from the computer and replaced it with Linux. Jonathan was curious and wanted to understand how this operating system worked.
This guy was too good.
It goes without saying that for his age, Jonathan was impressive in terms of the knowledge he was exhibiting, especially considering the fact that this was at a time when computers weren't as easy to learn as they are now and when learning resources weren't readily available at people's fingertips. The internet was still brand new. The World Wide Web was only introduced in 1990. Browsers were primitive and hard to actually navigate around and find information in. The browser Mosaic, later known as Netscape, which popularized the World Wide Web or WWW, was only introduced in 1993 and was the first browser to integrate text and graphics into a single web page. There were a significantly low amount of users surfing the web and even fewer contributing to it, compared to now where 66%, over half the global population, has regular access to the internet with the touch of a button. Around the time that this happened, the internet had only about 20 million registered users.
I personally feel like I was supposed to be there in that time, during that time. But I'm not. So yeah.
For some reason, when it comes to trading, people think that they can just jump into the markets without being taught how to do this. Trading is no different to any other profession. You need to be taught how.
It's terrible.
At around the age of 13, Jonathan's parents, who were now convinced something had to be done about his addiction, decided to confiscate his computer. And in response, he would run away from home, demanding his computer back for his return. But with the help of police, Jonathan was eventually found hiding at a nearby Borders Books. He argued that his addiction didn't hinder his grades and that this was evident as he performed quite well in school. A fact that was not revealed at the time, however, was that Jonathan had the power to alter his grades, as he had access to the Miami-Dade County school system. Most of Jonathan's hacks can be traced to the time period between June and October of 1999. Among these intrusions was hacking into one of the largest telecommunication companies in the United States at the time, Bell South Telecommunications. Despite the fact that this was a major crime, it was found that he never actually destroyed or damaged data. Neither was he guilty of exfiltrating or sending information outside of the organization, at least as far as the company and the media knew about. What may be surprising is that despite the fact that Bell South Telecommunications was a large enterprise, presumably having the necessary security controls, didn't even realize that Jonathan had been in their systems. It was found out when he actually confessed to it later on, but only when he was faced with much more harsher charges, as this was nothing compared to the severity of his actions that made him, a teenager who wasn't older than 15 or 16, a crucial target of law enforcement.
The law is after this boy. At a young age, you are a target. They should be out here asking him how he hacked so that they can improve their security. But no.
Jonathan had an online alias, Comrade, spelled with a zero instead of an O, and Comrade would go on sort of a hacking spree, gaining access into some of the most crucial government systems in the United States. The DTRA, or the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, the agency responsible to monitor and respond to any threat faced by the US, and the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, which you'd probably know as NASA. Now, he didn't directly hack these agencies, or seemingly he didn't intend to. In June of 1999, when Jonathan was looking around for servers to compromise, he found a vulnerable server in Huntsville, Alabama, in which he planted malware that allowed him to, essentially, take control of 13 other computers in the system. It turned out that he had just hacked into the Marshall Space Flight Center located in Huntsville, a unit which actively worked on developing and testing rocket engines, as well as building and maintaining the communications of the International Space Station. He then proceeded to steal what was estimated to be worth around $1.7 million worth of data. It was later revealed by a spokesperson at NASA that part of this loot was the source code of a software used to control the temperature and humidity of the living space in the International Space Station, described to be critical life-sustaining elements. When NASA finally noticed the breach, they had to shut down their systems for 21 days. which directly resulted in $41,000 worth of damages in, quote, contractor labor and computer equipment replacement cost. This put Jonathan on the map, as NASA began to work with the FBI by providing them information about the breach. Meanwhile, Jonathan, unaware that the law was catching up to him and increasingly growing confident with his skills, found another server in Dulles, Virginia. This time, he installed a backdoor onto the server. This is usually maliciously planted as a secret entry point into a system. With this, Jonathan remotely connected to the server. Once he gained access, he installed a sniffer to capture the network traffic, which would pick up information such as login credentials and other sensitive data. This time, it turned out that the data belonged to a unit of the US Department of Defense, the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, from which he downloaded thousands of messages belonging to Pentagon employees, acquired 19 usernames and passwords, as well as a portion of it belonging to military computers. This was the first time that a subsidiary of the Pentagon had been hacked, and so this wouldn't go unnoticed. On the 26th of January 2000, at about 6 in the morning, with a signed warrant, agents from the Department of Defense, equipped with guns and bulletproof vests, raided the young hacker's home, seizing any access he had to a computer or the internet. This included 4 PCs, a laptop, and a pocket computer. He was apprehended and tried in court shortly after, where he pled guilty to 2 counts of juvenile delinquency, one for hacking and stealing data from the Department of Defense, and the other for NASA. The case was made difficult due to Jonathan's age, 16 at the time of the verdict, and no other minor had ever been convicted for a cybercrime before, and definitely not for a crime of this magnitude. He was initially given 6 months in prison and probation until he turned 18. This decision was later reversed by the same judge, who would then go on to provide a very lenient sentence: 6 months of house arrest and a ban on computers for any reason other than his studies. Additionally, he had to write a letter of apology to both NASA and the Department of Defense, as well as work with them to show exactly how he'd gained access into these systems. If tried as an adult, Jonathan would have been charged with computer abuse and wiretapping, a crime that would have severe consequences, legal experts claiming it to be carrying over a 10-year sentence. Jonathan would later be found violating the terms of his sentence when he was found and apprehended on the streets. This time, his blood sample showed traces of drugs. The law didn't look too kindly on this. For the first time in history, a minor was sent to a juvenile detention center for cybercrime-related charges, flown to the Alabama Correctional Facility where he spent 6 months, his full sentence. This would gain attention in the press. Soon, Jonathan would become an example to other minors who would now have to think twice before engaging in any sort of cybercrime. Prosecuting attorney Guy Lewis would state that this case would be proof that the Justice Department was willing to get tough with juvenile offenders charged with cybercrime. He said, quote, "This case should send a clear message to our community that, given the appropriate case, we will aggressively prosecute to the full extent of the law." It's quite safe to say that the 6-month sentence in juvie struck a chord with the young teen. Previously, just the thought of it was enough to put aside this daring hobby. Never again. It's not worth it, because all of it was for fun and games, and they're putting me in jail for it. I don't want that to happen again. I can find other stuff for fun.
Okay, before we even move on to the next chapter, I think they dealt with him properly. And yeah, I can't complain. Definitely can't complain. And yeah, I'm actually happy. I'm happy. Because I thought they were gonna do something harsh and everything, but yeah, it makes sense.
After his release, Jonathan kept a low profile, deciding to live what seemed to be nothing more than an ordinary life. As he didn't partake in talking too much to the press, neither was there any sign that he was back to his old mischiefs. His father would later tell the press that after Jonathan returned from prison, he suffered from depression and seemed to be often anxious, worried that he might be under constant surveillance. On top of this, tragically, his mother would pass away from breast cancer when he was only 18, leaving behind a home for Jonathan and his brother to live together in. Several years would pass without much news about Jonathan. However, in January of 2007, the Secret Service would begin investigating the TJX hack, where millions of customers of the TJX department stores fell victim to a hack aimed at extracting their information. This included personal details such as addresses of the customers as well as their payment information stored on the website. Later, it was found that this crime was spearheaded by the now incarcerated Albert Gonzalez, who at the time, 28 years old, became a multimillionaire due to the hack. Along with Gonzalez, multiple other names of co-conspirators popped up in relation to the hack. Christopher Scott, Damon Patrick Toey, Maxim Yastrzemski, and the others who weren't yet identified, JJ and JW. The individual referred to as JJ was mainly tied to the Office Max hack in 2004, which he was said to have worked on with Christopher Scott, where they parked outside an Office Max connected to the store's Wi-Fi network and sniffed out credit cards that were swiped, the associated PIN numbers, and the account numbers. Christopher Scott was a friend of Jonathan. Unsurprisingly, this led to the theory that JJ was actually Jonathan James. Jonathan, of course, denied any involvement in the hacks. However, the police would raid his house soon after, along with the houses of his siblings. The agents never found anything incriminating or any connection between Jonathan and the retail hacks. But they did find a licensed firearm at his home, along with a suicide note that he had written previously.
Welcome to Torn, a free-to-play city filled with wannabe kingpins and criminal barons. With over 2 million players standing in your way, how will we...
Hold up. Suicide note, man. This guy, was he planning to take his life? What was going on in this guy's head? Yeah.
Less than 2 weeks later, Jonathan James would be found at home, lying in the shower with a gunshot wound to his head. The same gun that was found in the raid but not seized by the police. And alongside him, a suicide note. Most of the note has been redacted, but here's what's been publicized reads. When I saw the names in the subpoena, I googled sequel. And now that one Albert Gonzalez has been arrested in connection to TJX, a company based in Boston, it soon became clear he was trying to pin it on Chris. When I googled Kamba Johnny, what I saw blew my mind. Albert had been working with the Feds since 2003. That means that for 5 years he had been having people like Chris hack credit cards for him while he makes money selling them over the internet. And then at the same time, he has his buyers arrested to please the Feds. When this finally backfired on him, he gave them his ace in the hole, Chris, and got off with one count of wire fraud. Talk about entrapment. The Feds, of course, would see me as a much more appealing target than Chris. If they could tie me to this case, I'd be like Mitnick times 10 to them. Now, I honestly had nothing to do with TJX. Unfortunately, I don't picture the Feds caring all too much. Read Agent Steele guides to getting busted. The Feds play dirty. Chris called me the other day. He was in jail and they let him out. That can only mean that me. So, despite the fact that he and Albert are the most destructive, dangerous hackers the Feds have ever caught, they let them off easy because I'm a juicier target that would please the public more than 2 random fucks. C'est la vie. I have no faith in the justice system. Perhaps my actions today and this letter will send a strong message to the public. Either way, I have lost control over this situation, and this is my only way to regain control. Remember, it's not whether you win or lose, it's whether I win or lose. So sitting in jail for 20, 10, or even 5 years for a crime I didn't commit is not me winning. I die free. Incidentally, you can probably see the screenshots. They took an old suicide note of mine from 5 or 6 years ago but left me with my gun. Following this, he wrote down his will and testament, provided his router and VPN passwords along with the passwords to his MySpace and PayPal account, all of which has been redacted. I have the Beatles full on the hill in my head. I kept a journal in a safe place, read it with a grain of salt. I usually only wrote when I was depressed, and I tried not to incriminate anyone. More than for salvation, my soul is dead. So I will look after the flesh. I am the master of this computer. For me, the gates will open. The name JJ would later be connected to a Jim Jones, an alias that was used by Stephen Watt, who was also convicted for selling a packet sniffer program which he made for Albert Gonzalez. However, Robert James did believe that JJ was his son, but stated that even if he did partake in the Office Max hack in 2004, he didn't have anything to show for it, no real signs of having any wealth. There's very little evidence online to point to whether Jonathan was guilty or not. It seems a large part of those who do speak of the young hacker online seem to be on his side and agree that the law was too harsh on him. There are even theories that seem to point towards the idea that this was actually covered up by the Secret Service as a suicide, when he was actually murdered due to secrets he came to acquire from NASA and the Department of Defense. Conspiracies aside, I'm really on the fence when it comes to his initial conviction. On one hand, he was a minor, putting someone who is 16 or 17 in prison, juvenile or not, without a doubt affects an individual's future in significant ways. Their professional lives, the way others look at them, the fear of being in prison again, all of which ties into their mental well-being. On the other hand, he was given somewhat of a chance initially, and it's hard to argue that he wasn't at fault for his second sentence, unless again we look at conspiracy theories. I want to try and stay as neutral as possible since it's clear that we don't really know the full story. But I'm curious to know what you guys think. Let me know in the comments below. I'll leave the sources I used for this story, as well as a link to his interview with PBS if you want to get a better picture of his character. Thank you for watching the TWS channel, and I hope you tune in for the next one. Cheers.
Whoa, that was interesting. I also want to know what you think of the whole situation. Personally, I'm starting to take on the conspiracy theory of them, getting rid of him for the knowledge that he knows. That's what I think. I don't know what you think, but yeah, also go, check out the channel there, the TWS channel. Yes, as you can see, do subscribe to his content. Definitely looks like amazing content. I love the story of Jonathan James here, and sure, thumbs up. Let me know what you think. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Yeah, like, share, comment, do what you gotta do. For myself, Fearless Eagle, peace out and God bless. Peace.